Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you once again to the Focus on Parliament show with me, Okot Olaa. This week, irony struck the city of Kampala, where we had the Minister of Labour, Mr. Charles Olaa, shot dead by his own guard on matters allegedly around repayment. And this is very much a labor issue and an ironical topic, which has opened our eyes and brought our hearts back to the issues facing the wider Ugandan population in terms of labor, employment, and we would like to break it down with my colleagues today, Mr. Joseph Osheno, UPC ideologue, and Mr. Akampurira Harris, the Speaker of Kawempe Division. You're most welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, on straight to the topic, but first, a very current affair. This week we had a very interesting scenario in Parliament where we saw the Speaker, Honorable Anita Mong, effectively banning the Deputy Attorney General, I believe acting in capacity of the Attorney General, Mr. Kafuzi, from the floor of Parliament for good, as long as she is in charge of the House. Later on, we see some images of both Attorney Generals in an apologetic posture. We don't know the verbatim of what was discussed, but we believe there was hopefully a resolution around that. But it takes us to general wider issues around how our governance is done, the roles of the different players in government, and we start to ask ourselves whether even the people at the highest levels respect the institutions such as the Attorney General. Please, what were your reflections viewing this?
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting very much because it happens just immediately on the foot of the tragedy around Mr. Ngola's killing, by his own guard, and the week when the whole world should be marking in Uganda, merely marking, because I don't think there's much to celebrate about.
Yeah.
Labor as Workers' Day, as the realization and recognition of the powers of our sweat, and how corporations, big businesses, and whoever else we offer our labor, our services to, remunerate us back, including the National Assembly, which we, if anything, we take men and women there to go ahead and do some reasonable work, allegedly, on our behalf, and they should do so fine. It would appear that a part of the bad blood is the fact that the Speaker and many legislators, and by and large, possibly the country, is opposed to homosexuality, which is basically a general and African issue, but in this case that the Attorney General's office quite sensibly, continuously advises the President against the bill and legislation as presented, which is something that I would possibly agree with them because it's commonsensical, as it were. On this occasion, we know the strength of opinion by the Speaker. Now, whether she went extreme to personalize or sentimentalize the whole thing, I don't know, because on the clip in which she instructs that the Deputy Attorney General would never be allowed to speak on the floor of the Assembly in as long as she was in charge, I don't know whether it was about, for how she says, for disrespecting her. So what exchange it was, I do not know. But if it is generally in principle because of the position the Attorney General's chambers take vis-a-vis this very particular matter, then I think you could see the mess in which we are, where the Attorney General and the Attorney General's offices, much as their institutions of government, their political appointees, they're members of NRA. Mr. Museveni, the president, is NRA. The Speaker is NRA. The National Assembly is predominantly NRA. And you see the struggle around this tells you that our labor issues are neither here nor there. But what I find astounding, and I'm not a lawyer, is that she would say that these guys would not be able to speak. He would not be able to speak in Parliament in as long as she was there. She's got the power as the chairperson of the assembly, you know, to make certain rulings. But if then these are the people who are appointed to advise the president, and they are supposed to come and make accountability to the National Assembly, I don't know what legal quagmire she was trying to, legal and constitutional quagmire she was trying to create there. But of course, as you said, turns out that the two gentlemen, for whatever, I mean, for understandable reason, I mean, for whatever reason, go ahead and apologize, and the matter is sort of resolved. Maybe both sides actually says that they're being rather, you know, I was going to use the word silly in quote, meaning they're not being substantially responsible this occasion. But it's a manifestation of the mess in that National Assembly and how many cases Ugandans are taking for right. Because as I said, for me, I've argued, I think including those in this panel, forum, that the anti-homosexual legislation was a waste of time, waste of resources, were completely unnecessary, and that existing legislations are sufficient to safeguard the state of Uganda, including some of the concerns which have been raised in many cases by proponents of the legislation. And if anything, I have said on this program, since this is a program for Parliament, that I find it rather rich that an administration of Mr. Museveni, with the Legislative Assembly, led by my good sister Mongi, pushing heavy on this. But we know it's on record that under this very regime, you know, men in northern Uganda were raped, you know, by NRA men, and that is a matter that has never been solved. In as long as this matter is officially not resolved, and Mr. Museveni does not come to the country, does not go to Acholi, does not come to the country, explain himself, explain these men, particular men who are rapists, not men having a willing sex with men, but rapists in a very humiliating way in the course of war in Acholi. I don't think they've got a moral right and moral authority to basically run with this. But that's a slightly different matter.
Thank you very much. Harris, Mr. Osheno reminded me to further indulge the irony that it was actually a day after Labor Day that the Minister of Labor was shot dead over labor issues. What's your reflection? It appears from what happened that while we have a big unemployment issue in Uganda, that even when you're employed, there still remain similar issues, or even worse issues that could bring about frustration and bitterness, especially while in service of the state or the government. What's your reflection on the current state of labor in the country?
Well, first of all, my condolences to the family of the Honorable Minister in Olaa. Sorry is saddening to the society to witness any form of violence. Even if it is against the people you disagree with. Any form of violence is an attack on the human consciousness. It is an attack on our civilization. Unfortunately, as a country have gotten so used to violence, the regime benefits from it. But be that as it may, we really are saddened to witness such moments. So my sincere condolences, really. But the incident really is a microcosm of the greater labor unemployment relations in the country. Our labor is as poor as is almost everything else in our country, especially our state of governance. You know, when you have poor governance, almost everything goes to the dogs. So when you look at the labor statistics, and I want, as my opening remark, to give general observations about our state of labor. The Ministry of Labor, Gender and Labor, has released a study where they've said that more than 52% of Uganda's potential workforce are unemployed. So that's about 23 million Ugandans. So we have 23 million Ugandans. This is the potential labor force, who are of the working age, who are supposed to be productive, 23 million. So about 12.5 of them are not employed.
Yes.
In other words, they're economically inactive. So for every 2 Ugandans you meet on the street, that means that for every 2 Ugandans you meet on the street, one of them is unemployed. That is statistic number one. But let's even go into the half that is employed. According to a report by the Danish embassy, they indicate that even 1 out of 3 of those who are employed, they are in disguised employment.
Could you elaborate that?
Yeah, the disguised employment means people are underemployed, or they are not being productive at all.
Okay.
So, and it's easier to see. You could pick any department, you could pick any organization, you could pick most companies in this country. You could pick any ministry, you could pick any institution, and I would show you people who are underdeployed. So that's very bad. So you have a very, 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 very small group of people out of the 45 million Ugandans who are in employment. Then the report goes further to say that 90% of the economy is informal. Informality, legally speaking, means they are outside the state. In other words, 90% of Ugandans who are working are not in charge, are not under the state's regulation. Meaning that they don't pay taxes, meaning that they don't contribute directly to the running of the country. Well, they are productive. I don't want to discount them. They are productive, they produce items, but they are not under state regulation. So on retain that the government is in charge of in terms of regulation, or according to our labor laws and other regulatory framework. So, but I want to bring this discussion even closer to our viewers, because when we talk about the labor force and we bring we use them in the using statistics, usually we tend to confuse the people. So, but I would like to tell the viewers that when we talk about labor force, we are essentially talking about the development engine of the country. Because the country grows or stagnates depending on the quality of the labor force.
And how productive.
Yes, the productivity. Because it is from the productivity that we get the taxes. The taxes we use to work on the roads, the taxes we use to provide good health care. Of course, Museveni has never done anything close to that. The taxes we use to do anything transformative in the country. So the state of our labor force is so appalling. And therefore, no wonder the roads are broken, the schools are broken, the police force is broken, and you could add any security agents. All of them are broken. Just one example of the private guard of the Honorable Nalet Olaa. It was a result, that accident was a result, that unfortunate incident was a result of labor relations gone wrong. Yes, because from what we are told, we don't have a full story. Is that he was denied that. They denied that, but the family has come out to say that he was financially constrained. He was financially constrained, and the money was not coming in time, and so the situation, the economic reality, took toll on him. Unfortunately, he had a gun, and he used that gun to take the life of the minister. A minister. This is a minister. And this was an employee of a minister who the previous day had been on a national event commemorating the Labor Day, the International Labor Day. This event just happened, an event after, we're saying we are celebrating the toils. But then the immediate person to the man in charge of our labor affairs, his life is taken so brutally. But I would like us as a community to reflect back and say, how do we treat our maids at home? How much do we pay our maids? And this is a serious conversation, and it should concern us as a country. Because as long as we don't treat each other well in our relations, then this can go on. Maybe there are even similar or related things that are happening, only that they are not being reported. But the common story is that of the maids. I think that over 95% of the maids in this country are badly treated. They are treated less of human beings. They are paid below subsistence amounts.
True.
And when this conversation came up for legislation, you know, there have been so many advocates who have been saying, minimum wage, minimum wage, minimum wage, minimum wage.
Yeah.
Let's respect the dignity, the rights of the workers.
Yes.
Let's make sure that this country, everyone is entitled to a certain minimum amount of money for their subsistence. The president, the CEO of this country, has always come out to say that the minimum wage is going to scare away the investors. And I ask a question. Which kind of an investor is that who cannot pay a minimum wage? What sort of an investor is that? You are an investor in the country and you cannot pay minimum wage? Yet you're coming from countries with high level labor rights, key among them the minimum wage. So it's unfortunate that as a country we keep talking about minimum wage. And I think it's high time the president should come out and respect the rights of those people who are the majority within our society.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I agree with you on the point about maids. A lot of the time we see cases where maids have tortured some of these young children.
Yeah.
And when you trace back, it's actually reciprocating how they are treated by their principals. But Harris, just before we move to Mr. Sheno, in that same report, the minister said 70% of unemployed youth, perhaps as an argument, are not actively searching for jobs. Should we dismiss that as a defense, or is it something that also needs to be looked into?
Well, I don't know. I haven't looked at the report in detail. And sometimes.
But she's to the effect that the young people are not.
I read the executive summary. And I looked at the statistic, but I don't know how she measured that. I don't know, for example, what she considered, what the report considered. I understand the person was charging some guy called Asim Alex.
Yeah.
I don't know what the study considered to say that this one is active researching or this one is active researching. If it is true, then there are two possible reasons. Number one is that people have given up. They have searched and searched and searched, and doesn't make sense anymore. If that is not the reason, then it is because there are no good stories coming out. Even those who are employed, maybe because it's not about being busy working, but the quality of work you're doing matters. The self-image of you, how it is reflected in the kind of work you're doing matters. How much you're being paid matters. Is it rewarding employment, or it is just to convince yourself that you're busy working when actually you're not working at all? Sure. I know people who work for certain organizations and companies, which I don't want to mention here, but what they are paid is not even enough to cover their transport. Some of them, what they are paid, after deduction of transport, they can't pay their rent. Yeah, that's a state of affairs. So if you're in a community where your colleagues who are working have not been able to pay their rent, is that a good motivation for you to go and work? So again, I think this is an area for further study.
Yeah.
But we all, beside the study, we all know the reality in this country. Number one, that there are limited opportunities for decent employment.
Yeah.
In other words, we have we have not transitioned so much from subsistence farming into production, into manufacturing, into the service sector, into knowledge-based economies, which offer opportunities that are rewarding and are more decent. So we are hugely still a subsistence economy.
Yeah.
Even when technology is here, the fourth industrial revolution is here, study shows that we have not transitioned.
True.
So there has been slow structural progress from our rudimentary way of doing stuff.
Yeah.
And they are all over Kampala to see. When you see how we deal, how we sell stuff, how we go about our business, you can see that we are still subsistence. When you're traveling from Kampala to Chisoro, I come from, the bus has stopped 4 times for people to go back into the bush. That's going back into to go to ease themselves. Can you imagine? Yes, you people, bus has to stop. Go ease yourself. It stops somehow. Go ease yourself. Women this side, men this side. I mean that level of organization, and then you have to lose that amount of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in conclusion, I think that there is a need for strategic planning for our labor force, and that includes the education sector, because the education sector is in charge of training our human resource people who come into the labor force. Yes, so the quality of education tells the quality of the doctors we have, the quality of engineers you have, and when you look at the roads being constructed in the country, do you see more Ugandan engineers in charge of contracts, or are you seeing lead engineers being Chinese and other nationalities? Yet you have a school of engineering at Mackay University that has lasted for over 60 years.
Yeah.
When you look at specialized medical attention, is it from this country, or you have to get it elsewhere?
You get it elsewhere, but with Ugandan doctors.
So we need a holistic approach that prioritizes human development as essential. And as I conclude, moderator, the nation grows or stagnates depending on the productivity of individuals. There is no mistake.
True.
So if you have a government that doesn't prioritize the individual, then that government is not worthy the name.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we'll get back on that issue about whether it's the education or the field itself that is frustrating young Ugandans. Over to you, Mr. Joseph. There's a saying that when you stay in the latrine long enough, it ceases to stink. Luckily, we have you here to give us a comparative outlook into things. Many of us have lived in this reality, and perhaps it has ceased to stink to a certain level. But having you here, would like you to break down for us a comparative outlook, given that you have been in Uganda before NRM, or NRA as you call it, but also lived in a country other than this one. What reflections do you see when you look at the state of labor affairs in Uganda?
How could you use that analogy? The Republic of Uganda stinks, and my good friend Andrew Mwenda qualified this a decade ago when he still had other roles other than the new ones, for which I wish him very well. Said that the bush, has come to Uganda, So the Musevenis went to the bush, they came with the bush, and the bush has to go stuck in Kampala. Unfortunately, Harrison, the bush in Kampala travels with you to Kisoro. So it's a national tragedy.
Yeah.
But that said, also tragically, I would like to record the fact that I offer my condolences to the Ngola families.
Yeah.
I did not know Mr. Ngola personally, except that he's an NRA minister. But I also know that I understand he was called Mr. Macho Duogo.
Yes.
So he was very fiery, when it comes to these NRA wars that Museveni has spread across the country, including in his own northern Uganda, including Lango, NRA wars in Lango and Acholi. But I know Sam Olaa, his brother.
Yeah.
And I know Betty Olaa, Sam's wife. And I knew them when Museveni arrested Sam Olaa. I was a student at university. I even went and visited the Ngolas in their home to pay homage, whatever reason those were. So, to that extent, yes, I've been in this place for a very long time. So, but I was in a fine Uganda before it looked like a stinky place. That said, back to the principal subject of conversation.
Yeah.
Labor, workers. I will not do the stats as Harrison has already done. Whatever the case, I am privileged that I represent a political party which is a workers' political party. UPC was founded as a workers' political party on behalf of the Ugandan workers, the Africans in the 40s and 50s seeking to better themselves in a Uganda that was massively then controlled by the British, white privilege, Asian privilege, and the average African, including in Luwero, where Ignatius Musasia, first leader, came from. And these guys mobilized and organized. So when you talk about labor, it is very much about how people were working in factories, people were working in factories, people was teachers, Africans, but they were getting less pay than the Asians and the Bazungu. I'm contextualist from Uganda's perspective. Then people like my grandfather, who was a farmer and also had cows. My grandfather had more cows, I'm sure, than Mr. Museveni's father, but Museveni would normally boast about some of these things without evidence that I know. And these are workers, and they're productive as well. These guys organized, and the more they organized to seek fair pay, fair wages, decent working conditions, decent accommodation. And remember, the time before Museveni came from the bush, brought the bush to Kampala, doctors got accommodation, teachers got accommodation, nurses got accommodation, most public workers got accommodation. Most of the houses that you see the NRA people boasting around Kampala were built, constructed by UPC government after the 60s, deliberately for our workers, civil servants and public servants, workers. So working conditions, terms and conditions, gears for working. I walk around Kampala and I see terribly women looking like my mothers, sweeping, using rudimentary stuff for the streets for the Musevenis to come in the big, very many cars at our expenses. That is the state. But contextually in history, these things, the workers' day, maybe I could just go back very briefly. That the emergence of Workers' Day came from the beginning of Industrial Revolution, when all of a sudden, when of course, people who were selling their labor started to seek to realize that, look, it's only slavery where I work 24 hours. It's only slavery where I work for no pay or very little. It's only under slavery that I don't have the working gears. It's only slavery that I don't get my pay on time. And so people started demanding for fair wages. People started demanding for 8-hour working, that much later, but merely working 5 days a week. People had to fight for these things. And one particular one, going back to the 1890, how we ended up with the campaigns for the Labor Day 1890, where the socialist movements around the world, and particularly in the Western Europe, and in this case, North America, were involved in 1890, actually, where the American security forces, of course, they're normally agents of excess capitalism, overreacted against the workers. And in the course of doing that, radical workers threw a bomb and people died. And so that became the Haymarket stuff, hence the beginning of much more are claiming for this. I am giving it background. I'm sort of going around. I should have gone it the other way around. To make sure that Ugandans and viewers know that the Workers' Day, the Labor Day, is not a gift of the state, number one. And then number two, what are we marking? So then if contextual in history, it was very much about this one day in a year where we appraise and some of the things that both of you have talked about, conditions of maids and so conditions of drivers. And by the way, I have friends with whom I took exception how they treated, guys who serve in a restaurant.
Yes,
we went out. That's about quite a decade ago. Went out somewhere in the outskirts of Kampala, and this lady friend of mine was trying to impress me. I've talked about it very commonly, and she was giving this very terrible instruction to this young lady who possibly just got the orders wrong merely. And I said, "What is this? So if you're doing it like this to this person who's actually here to serve you, how possibly would you be treating other people? And are you trying to impress Mr. Ochieno that you're bored?" So things like that. But anyway, so generally it's very much about that. But fast forward, we're in Uganda. Other than the terms and conditions of work, it is the responsibility of workers to demand for work.
Yeah.
And to the extent that poor young Ugandan doctors, unlike in the time of UPC that made Museveni, UPC made Museveni, not trained him the bad manners he's got, but to make him come as a child that is able to go to secondary school, to high school, and then to university, and even get free job in president's office. Simple as a civil servant, because you've got your qualification. Nobody knew Museveni about his office. I insist that nobody knew the guy simply because he brought his papers, and there's a job for you there as a researcher. Not because you are a dubious NRA or UPM or whatever kind of. You did not have to be UPC. He was actually DP kind of. So he got a job in president's office. What am I saying? Workers, they put us in the state in which we're asking, what is the state of employment? What's the state of unemployment? What is the growth in terms of creating employment opportunities? What about the situation amongst the peasantry, or people who are workers, including these guys who grow tomatoes to come and sell to Kampala? How much are they paying and how much are not paying? But also even you, the average worker, including you, the average lawyer, after you've got your job, what is the worker's situation? Other than your own being able to rent. In your case, you've been very unfortunate because you'll not get government houses like the UPC gave to the Musevenis. So you've got to rent. And like Harris has already said, even if you earn 2 million Uganda shillings, you still have to pay high rent. You still have to pay for transportation. You still have to pay for medical health care, which already has been taken off by tax. And you still have to save some money. I know you're a young man looking to take your son or your daughters to posh schools in the future. Still have to save for that. All those are worker situations, realities about this. Now, in most developed countries, since you asked me, particularly the most capitalist country, America, presidents are actually judged on a monthly basis by how many jobs they've created, per month. How many jobs are created per month? How many jobs has NRA created since they came to power? Let some economists, and Mr. Museveni allegedly studied economics and political science, let him actually delegate. In fact, for him, he's got a lot of time. We pay him for nothing. Let him go by the riverside, lakeside, Lake Victoria one morning. Mr. Museveni, how many jobs have I created? And come and try and impress Ugandans. He will not tell you. But those are the things. So how many jobs created? Quality of jobs. Instead, for us, parents educate children in a very difficult way. Young, beautiful girls finish universities and other courses and whatever, and then they begin queuing up to go to do cleaning jobs in the Middle East. And actually, our government, the regime actually boasts we are exporting labor. So I can go on and on and on. So because what's the state of employment now? Actually, I think one of the responses you talk about, which I'm not very particularly familiar, I also saw a certain report which says that I think up to 70% of people who are working formally in formal sectors do not have employment contracts. So if you don't have employment contracts, then what are the other issues? The other issues then are contractual terms and conditions, contributions to NSSF, you contribute to what? National insurance savings on what about what? How many annual leaves do you get? How many days do you get for maternity leave? I'm suggesting that a future UPC government will be able to put on table a conversation about paternity leave, meaning now fathers, because all this way major campaigns. In Uganda, as I said, I don't know how much women get by law, you know, for maternity leave.
Yeah.
But I know in most other countries, in you know, it's half a year. In Scandinavia, you can take up to 1 year if you so wish, and things like that. I think maybe up to a year and half of which is possibly you get percentage quotas and reduction. So all these, so workers' days are really about humanity days, where you're able to look at all these other things holistically. Yeah. Here, unfortunately, they can't spend a huge amount of our money in Namutamba, and they boast in Namutamba. And actually, in that Namutamba, I saw there's a clip that it was. The clip was focusing on Mr. Museveni and focusing on Mr. Museveni. So Mr. Museveni should be praised and thanked, you know, and appreciated for Labor Day, when actually he's the chief executive, you know, of torturers of labor, to the extent that Harrison says that one of the things that Obote got problems with in the 60s, Harrison, you mentioned that, was with the Israelis and other so-called investors. And the idea was, we are a young new nation. You've got major contracts here, which they did, like construction, including in terms of some of the housing projects. That no, we reject the idea that, okay, you come with technology, possibly come with money, but that you've got top engineers, second-lot engineers, and then you only leave the job Ugandans to push wheelbarrows. You also have engineers. Now, those are things that governments should do at a level when they're negotiating for contracts. At the stages where possibly even they're negotiating for aid or loans, because some of these things are conditional, maybe World Bank money, and with possibly, in this case, German technology to do particular projects if it's in oil. But at that stage, you should simply say that World Bank money, you know, what percent, at what rate, interest rate, German technology, how many, and how much, and how many of Ugandans are coming, including how much are we going to be able to train our local guys to be able to take over. And you're absolutely right. Should we be having, and by that I resent that, and I don't want to pretend about, because I say, I really, really resent people who look apparently non-Ugandan, you know, sometimes doing some very basic jobs in the streets of Kampala and across Uganda. I genuinely do. And I say so officially. And some of these are supposed to be friends. Why? Because in this country, we have outsourced the Republic of Uganda, you know, to a foreign capital. And, you know, the guys who are supposed to be responsible for the average Ugandan worker, you know, has absolutely gone either to sleep or to work for his children and grandchildren.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Osheno. Our dear viewers, I hope you've been enriched. We are still proceeding with this beautiful discussion together with Mr. Harris Akampurira and Mr. Joseph Osheno. Stick with us, and we will continue after the break.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome back to the Focus on Parliament show, our dear viewers, with me, Okot Olaa. Today we are discussing employment and labor rights issues in the light of the recent homicide where we saw our Minister of Labor, unfortunately, shot by his own guard. We want to discuss some of the wider issues that this particular incident brings up regarding how the Ugandan worker is treated and their spites. With me today to discuss that is Mr. Joseph Osheno, UPC ideologue, and Mr. Akampurira Harris, the Speaker of Kawempe Division. And straight to the discussion once again, a very rich discussion, this one. There's a common sentiment that there's a lot of labor discrimination in Uganda. Perhaps, like Harry said, people give up on trying to search for jobs. And we saw the statistic by the minister saying 70% of Ugandans who are unemployed are actually not looking for a job.
And so that's their fault.
And so it's their fault.
They're very lazy, too lazy.
When you try to listen to the voices of the people,
yeah,
normally you hear some sentiments. And one of them is that there's labor discrimination. They say you hear things like jobs belong to a particular group of people.
Yeah.
Some of these things. Once again, you enrich our panel with a great comparative scope. And I would like you to hint or go in depth on this issue of labor discrimination. Is it a reality?
It is a fact. And although I'm not the person who's best placed to do it, because sometimes when I do it, they'll say that's a chain of UPC would say so, wouldn't he? But as a matter of fact, you know, I hinted and I was being very generous to this regime. You know, it has been argued suggestively that you go to Uganda Revenue Authority, you know, there are particular categories. Some people even tell you that there's a special languages for Uganda Revenue Authority. You go to big agencies like the Uganda National Roads Authority, sort of the same. You go to agencies like the National Waters and Sewerage Corporation, founded and built by UPC, thankfully still remains in relative hands, sort of the same. You go to Office of the President as public service, you know, it's the same. You go to Ministry of Defense, the same. But then you go to the guys in charge of the army, and then you ask, how many army generals does this country have? Then you realize that one family has 5 top generals. Ugandans see these things, they just can't, you know, these are the things. Now, while many others might be perceptions, you know, and perceptions, many of these things are commonsensical fact. There have been suggestions that in the police, and many of these things, you look at the figures of how many people in the top echelon. Of course, the top police chief is my good brother, Okot. But when you look through the rest of the top ranks of senior officers, some of these things are obvious. People ask you, how many OCs, you know, OCs, how many regional police officers, how many district police, you know, these are open, obvious facts. When you go to agencies that do oil, you know, when you go to Uganda Airlines, no. What this regime has done to this country will require a very organized and deliberate leadership. And Harrison and I were talking during an early break about some of these things, about the question of leadership. I think it's going to take very deliberate and very bold and genuinely very mature leadership to transit this country away from Mr. Museveni and return it to what it was once upon a time, where your merit took you to wherever it should take you. I know that, for example, in the 60s, I know a living retired civil servant who told me personally that the then Minister of Agriculture and Vice President, John Babiha, wanted him as the PS when they were working on this big project of agricultural revolution by UPC, that you saw things like in the cattle corridors, you heard about the cattle deeps and some of these dams that when it came to Museveni rewarded it to his, what he would call girls, the Kazibes and the Eta monies, you know. So Vice President tells Obote that he wanted this particular guy to be the PS to drive this project. Obote said, no, I do not appoint. I do not appoint a permanent secretaries. You know, Harris, did you get it? Yes. Right. And so this gentleman, this is a living story. This gentleman goes to the then head of civil service, who later on went on to become the vice chancellor of Makerere University, Kalumuzo, late, retired. Killed him, like killed many people, and Museveni's friends, you know, killed him. And so the guy went through formalities. I'm trying to tell you how systems and structures, you know, ideally should work, including without prejudice to identities. These are no longer the issues in this country. And as long as some of those top things are like that, what do you expect an average job in Centenary Bank in the corners of Kampala. What do you expect for an average job in an MTN shop? I even know that some of these telecommunication companies, you go to some of the people who are merely supervisors in some of those front offices. You know, they're jobs for who? So one, there is identity called tribalism in public services and public deliveries, starting from the top. And by they talk about the top, in President's office, when Museveni got a job in President's office, I was saying, you know, nobody knew him. The head of civil service was Mr. Wilson Okwenje, now in Museveni's exile in Canada. He was, he was head of research in Obote's office. Okwenje is a Musamia and Obote from the north, just for avoidance of doubt. So Okwenje is the one who recruited Museveni. You know, and so you did not need to know. I told a friend of mine about 4 years ago that this very particular story, they couldn't believe it. They said this, because the going narrative was that because Museveni was UPC and so they were recruiting UPC. No, not at all. But number two, I also told someone that even in the elite current equivalent of Museveni's son's brigade called Special Forces, of course, it's his son's thing, although it's been changed in leadership, you know, I told them that Obote had what they call a unit, so a small specialist unit, presidential escort unit for president, vice president, diplomatic teams. It was led by and represented across the Republic of Uganda. And when I told this particular lady, without prejudice, from Ankole, that there was one Asime, and Asime is a good friend of mine, you know, who was, she was surprised. So look, this thing, the job for the boys, the job for our communities has been perfected by Mr. Museveni. These days, Mr. Museveni is beginning to redistribute these things in order to calm down Acholi, calm down Teso, make them forget about.
But is it substantive redistribution?
It's not. It's not. No, but I'm talking about the top in order to calm down to the real things in terms of cultural discrimination, which ideally should not.
If I could come in, I think that you're right. In as far as you say that Museveni has not helped the problem of discrimination.
No, he said that he created it.
No. I know he as a leader, he has an obligation. And there is an example of Tanzania. When Mwalimu Julius Nyerere took over leadership in Tanzania, what he did was to encourage schools. For example, if a kid was born in southern Tanzania, to go to schools in the north, to go to schools in the west. Kids from east study from
that's what happened here
in the west. So and in the implementation of that national policy, because Tanzania, just like Uganda, it also has different ethnicities. So to do that, what they did was to make sure that there are good schools in every region of the country. And there were subsidies for a kid who was born in Western Tanzania studying in Eastern Tanzania. In other words, if you study in a region other than where you're born from, then you would be given a subsidy. And in deployment, during public service deployment in Tanzania, what they did in furtherance of that policy was to make sure that you don't work in an area where you're born from. So in so doing, there was a diffusion of ethnic and familial tendencies that we see a lot in Uganda. Museveni, of course, Mr. Museveni, as a leader of this nation, is supposed to lead by example. But generally speaking, I think that there is a tendency for societies which are still basic, which are still substantive, to trust more the familial and tribal ties, which, of course, is a negative and limited tendency. I'll give you an example.
Is that economically determined, or it's a culture, political culture issue?
It's a social cultural sentiment that is evolutionary in nature, that is common among subsistence economies. Now,
that's why we're asking: is it economic determinist issue or a leadership problem? Because you've just talked about Tanzania,
I've said naturally. Because human beings, we are social animals. And because we are social animals, we associate with our ethnicities and our tribes. Families, tribes, and ethnicities. That's where our loyalty and trust belongs. That's where our first trust is. And that is natural, it's an evolutionary trusted. Now, but that, in terms of economics, it doesn't help, especially when you're speaking at the national level. So what the leader does then to diffuse these, sentiments is to do what Tanzania did. Unfortunately, as Uganda, we still have those background forces in operation. That's why when you go to URA, you will tend to find more employees who come from one ethnic group than the other.
And some from one village.
Yes, some from one village. When you go into top appointments in the Yame, in top departments, you find that there tends to be one tribe that is preferred over the others. And it's been going on for a long period of time.
No, sorry, Harrison. Harrison, with absolute respect, you interrupted me, and I was about to build to conclude the underlying things. And I didn't mind the interjection, except I don't want to lose train of it. The only unfortunate thing, though, is that your intervention is absolutely misses the point. Harrison, be kind to Ugandans. Uganda, ethnically, I know people don't like to talk about a good Uganda before NRA. There was a good Uganda before NRA. That's the point I was trying to make. And be fair to Ugandans. Ugandans from Kisoro, Ugandans from Kotido. Ugandans lived in a diversity. The educational systems, the political systems, including the idea which was supposed to be implemented in 1972, whereby if you were to become a member of parliament for Kisoro, you needed to have got some votes across the country.
1+3?
Was the 1+3? Was due there? No, the current situation is created by NRA. Meaning, no, just to make the point. But in the 60s, because the thing you're talking about.
Let him conclude.
But Mr. Otieno, the reason, and I don't discount that happened, the reason the UPC government built that system, was because they were trying to show a certain fundamental attribute.
And it was successful.
Yes, I'm not disputing that. I'm saying it is common. It's common to human nature.
No, but what I reject is to present it now. The emphasis you're making that it is human nature. Who knows human nature? We've come back to it. How did we come back to it? So anyway, I'll just conclude this. That quite clearly, NRA found a Uganda in which Okot was absolutely comfortable studying in Kigezi College. NRA found a Uganda in which the president of Uganda deliberately builds a school in Luwero where he knows he's got 5% support. NRA found a Uganda in which the Kabale Katuna Road, Mbarara Kabale Road is tarmacked, as a priority road, instead of Apache Lira Road, kind of stuff. NRA found that. That's the point I'm trying to make. This thing's built, and the problem is because NRA has been in power for now 40 years, the thing has now been perfected as a narrative. And I usually go back to this to help, including parliamentarians who may watch, some who may be 40, and they'll have no clue that there was a Uganda that worked for all Ugandans. That you're able to build hospitals and equip. And once you've built and equipped hospitals, and once you've built schools and equipped them, and once you've created sufficient jobs, because I was going to go into that, the tendency to begin to carve out for yourself becomes less and less. I was going to say that I know that, for example, in fact, I was about to talk about trade unionism and the rest of it, but I think let's just stick to this. Where as late as the time I was at university and before I was in university, where somebody gets two public service jobs. You're living in university and you've got a job in Bank of Uganda, and you've got a job in Ministry of Health and Ministry of Justice, for example, and you want to decide which jobs you go for. The idea that now you would do something that happened in my own family. I've got a young person whom I educated, graduates, goes to look for a job in Kampala, and is asked for 1 million shillings. The poor boy doesn't tell me because he partly fears, because he wasn't sure how I was going to react, and the boy doesn't get a job. And now for years, it's a project manager person, unemployed, simply because either his name doesn't fit, his face doesn't fit. In this case, because he's not been able to produce 1 million Uganda shillings to please a particular group of individuals. In one way, it's tribalism, and it's a nonsense which must end, But on the other, It's because of lack and insufficiency in terms of creation of jobs. Because the fewer, the more people, in economic terms, people will try and scramble for the leader. But I just want to conclude this to take it back, because I know we may not have time. That while talking labor, which is all these other things, it's important that Ugandans, and particularly young Ugandans, begin to demand to see that government takes responsibility for job creation. And normally when we talk about job creation, we talk about private sector. No, partly governments do this in terms of projects, but also, even if private sector, enabling private sector organizations to create jobs. And when they're doing that, let it be part of the conversation that, okay, you come as MTN, you're going to start up a project in Kisoro. How many jobs are going to come out of this? So these things are done. Central governments do, and I've seen it. I've been part of it. I've been part of regeneration, including local governments elsewhere. It works. And when you do that, you compel the private sector to know that, look, I'm not just going to walk into a bit part of Nakawa, just make my own money and go. And then finally, when those companies come in, I am saying that Ugandan workers, this week of workers for parliamentarians, legislators, we need to review the existing trade union legislations, number one. I strongly feel, because we don't have time, that the existing trade union organizations need a complete overhaul, including their leadership. And then after that, we make sure that it's compulsory that every organization established, as a business, workers in those organizations must have a right to be unionized. Trade unions, so that Ugandan workers are able to coordinate and have some of this conversation. The more we have that, the more we'll know that things to do with contracts, working terms and conditions. So therefore, including in recruitment, that's what I'm going, including recruitment. Most big organizations in free world and a free UPC government and environment those days, in the future, that if there is an MTN, we know that there is a recruitment in MTN to deal with some of these other issues. There's equity in terms of representation, in terms of women, but also many things, especially cases like in terms of disability, but above all, possibly youth representation. But most importantly, that there's a trade union representative as part of the recruitment, whatever the size, so that you make sure that this thing is fair, equitable. Because part of the human nature you're talking about, people aren't with prejudice. But when systems are in place, and when people know that they're accountable, and when people also know that even after MTN has done its recruitment, it has to make its annual or quarterly returns to Ministry of Labor or to central government, they'll think again. So meaning that instead of having a regime from the bush where people do their businesses, eat whatever they go to do, we need to know that, Ugandans need to know that well. As Ugandan workers, in the broadest sense, we need to have organized systems and institutionalized to make sure that, the founding principles of this country, where you build a nation state for citizens actually do have rights, and those rights do apply.
Thank you very much. And it reminds me of a saying that you don't rise to your ideas, you follow your systems. And on to you, Harris. You're an activist, and I believe I've seen you on the streets, though you didn't see me.
Coward.
There has been riots in the last 1 week by intern doctors. I believe after the 5 years, they're supposed to do 1 year and is it basically semi-paid or some sort of service?
Internship supposed to be paid.
Service to the state for 1 year. But in our case, there's either been delays or non-payment of some of these interns. There are a lot of strikes that happen, including some of the ones you cause. But when you see a medical doctor being held at by a policeman violently, it really goes to the heart. And you really start to ask yourself, why are things like this? But on a wider note, there's an education system, and there's the labor system of the country run by the service commissions. Where is the problem? Is it the kind of graduates coming out of the system, or is the system that is waiting for them?
Yeah, but I would like to first comment on discrimination, something that my senior brother has been discussing.
Yes.
Well, I agree essentially with what he said. Just that he gives it a narrow scope. He focuses more on President Museveni. And for me, I think it's a bigger problem. It's national. It's now embedded in our fabric as a people. Why do I say so? Mention any company that is Ugandan owned, any organization that is Ugandan owned, any farm, any partnership that is Ugandan owned, and we assess it for
identity representation.
for identity representation, and I will show you that hugely 90% of these organizations do not recruit according to competence, but their first benchmark for recruitment is ethnic and familial ties.
And that
hold on.
That's my point.
What do you say about his argument, which is basically that as a leader, you're in charge of culture?
Hold on. So if you do an assessment of these privately owned organizations, companies, establishments, informal or formal, anywhere you go within our country, you'll find that the first benchmark for recruitment is the ethnicity and familial ties. Is it a problem? Yes. It's a very, very, very big problem. So do we need a reset? Yes, I think that's a problem that is bigger than just limiting it to Mr. Museveni. Of course, as a leader, as a president of the country, he has the first mandate to lead by example in his appointments, in his everything. But I think I am tired of using Museveni as an example, because we all know that Museveni has failed this country. So some of the problems, we need to go to their fundamental roots. And some of these are rooted in our human nature. And when we understand that, then we go back to the Obote framework that he's talking about. Now, coming to your question.
Yes, please.
I do believe that the education is the foundation of any nation.
Yes, please.
Because our human resource comes from our education. So any nation is as good as its education. Yeah. So you talk about the medics, you talk about, I've not seen lawyers protesting, but medics traditionally, these were professions of high honor. They were highly revered, noble professions. Yeah. First of all, you know that because they are noble, they are so essential, there is always ready work. And in serious countries, this is the case. You finish your medical school, there is another stage for transition as an intern, as an apprentice, and you're well paid. The conditions of work are good because your profession is a noble profession. This is not in any way to undermine any other profession. Yeah, but to recognize just the importance of the medical profession. So to see the medic interns being held, like he said, being abused, being ashamed, like we all saw, it shows you how far, how deep we have fallen as a country. And also speaks to, number one, the collapse of institutions within this country, and the failure of our labor market. You know, part of the problem is talked about discrimination. The other problem is because of discrimination, you have incompetent people in serious offices. The permanent secretary for minister, for various ministers, you could assess them and you would say, you easily say incompetent. And I say this without any fear for contradiction. Pick any permanent secretary of any minister and I will tell you incompetent. And because we have incompetent, grossly incompetent, leaders in key persons in key positions of influence, then everything else dies. And that brings me to our education sector, because education sector is the one which prepares us to get here. How good is it? He's been talking about schools from Eastern, from Northern, most of which have collapsed. Schools which used to be big schools. Tell me, how many kids from Western Uganda have you heard of going to Northern Uganda? Not in our study in Eastern Uganda. Not in our generation. How many kids from Central can go and study in Eastern Northern? That is not to say that schools in upcountry Western Uganda or rural Central Uganda are any better, but say that the level of degradation in the Northern and Eastern Uganda has been so much. And because the level of degradation in these areas have been so much, the level of deprivation has been so much, most kids who are likely to go to better schools are kids from Western Uganda and Central Uganda. So even if we say, okay, meritocracy, merit, we say, okay, the next jobs in Uganda, next 10, 20 years are going to be awarded on merit. And then you say, okay, bring your papers. I guarantee you, because of the discrimination against these regions, you're going to find that 70 to 80% of qualifying kids are going to be from Central region and Western Uganda. So is there a need for affirmative action? Yes.
So it's affirmative action times equal representation.
Yeah, so for me, the problems are 2 levels. Number 1, of course, we need a better quality education.
Yes.
We all agree that our education is very bad. But even schools which are trying to thrive in a very hostile environment, they are concentrated in these 2 areas I've talked about. And families which can afford these schools, because they're open to all Ugandans, but the question is, which families do afford to take their kids to these schools, which brings students to Makerere University and so forth? They are concentrated in Western and Central region, and that's for a fact. Was it the case when we had President Obote and so forth? No. Every region of this country had a strong school. We had Mwiri College, we had we had Laibi College. Then we had schools where a kid would be proud to go to Mwiri. And they would be rest assured that if they do what they ought to do, they would succeed. Is that the story now? No. So that's what the problem is. Everything is broken down, and you can pick any sector and would point to the same root cause of the problem. Poor leadership. Leadership makes a difference.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Our time is fast spent, but from you, I withdraw that while the person of the president is to blame for a lot of the things, there are certain monsters that we inevitably have to face after him, including some of the complex issues, like even when it's merit now, the merit will look discriminatory.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair point to give. But our time is fast spent. However, we have different stakeholders listening, the parliamentarians, the public, the government, and I would like to listen from you a parting message on this issue around labor and employment, the plight in labor and employment that we see in our country on a day-to-day, and what can be done to better it.
Yeah, I think that Parliament and other key stakeholders at the planning level need to prioritize labor. And when we talk about prioritization of labor, we are not talking about it in isolation, but rather a holistic approach. And that is going as far as education, making sure that we have an education sector that produces competent laborers, qualified laborers. But once these people are, are raised onto the labor market, then there are also rules and regulations which are put in place to make sure that the conditions of work are good. There is motivation to do the work, that people are working under decent conditions. And that is, of course, not forget that 90% of our economy is in the informal sector. We also need to plan for the informal sector. And for me, I think that to do that, the government must pick interest in especially the underrepresented groups. And these are maids, these are drivers, these are waitresses in our restaurants, these are private bodyguards, these are, people who sweep our streets. There must be a minimum wage for them. We should have done that like so yesterday. And for as long as we don't do that, and so human rights of these groups of people are going to continue to be infringed upon. But related to that is also important of how do we enhance productivity, the productivity of an individual. And this goes to the individual person, because I also understand that government can't do everything. Government has its responsibilities, but even the individual has their own responsibilities. So what is our work ethic as a country? Yeah, it's common. Now it has become common. It's a common challenge, I think, globally, that you go to work and the first thing people do is to log in on the computer. They're checking WhatsApp, checking Facebook, Twitter, and you find that people are physical at work, but 50% they have finished their time on irrelevant stuff, meaning that concentration and productivity levels have dropped. And once they drop at every organization, it has a direct implication on the economy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris, for your insights, not just that, but throughout the conversation today. Mr. Joseph Osheno, a few parting words to our dear viewers on the matter.
That primarily that for Parliament, that I hope that my sister Anita is able to provide the required leadership, including ensuring that there's no bullying in the National Assembly, and to ensure that there is no sexism in the National Assembly, and particularly that younger legislators that have had this, younger female, beautiful guys in there are not, their lives are not made uncomfortable, and that legislators, I know the number is too big. I know Anita is too big, man. Even if you reduce that assembly by 50%, you'd still struggle to look for people's hands to make to speak. That these things are done without prejudice, and that is not dependent on the political organization. And so, therefore, people who want to have an opportunity to present a private members bill also have an opportunity, like private members bill bills that require instruction from State House. But also number two, that we've talked about jobs and representation. There have been claims and allegations of jobs for the boys and jobs for the girls in the National Assembly, including top guys, ferrying the entirety of their villages, entirety of their communities, and yes men and yes girls. The National Assembly, I was defending parliamentarians the other day that you are the top diplomats of this country. So if that you are the top diplomats of this country, then really that should be an exemplar assembly. That some of the things that you may not going to get from State House, since these guys came from the bush. But in particular, we should also say that it's absolutely unacceptable that legislators should be whipped. These guys are equivalent to popes, in political terms. That a member of parliament is beaten the way it was, that it should be more than what we saw. So that people should be going to work where there is no intimidation. They should be going to work to give them the opportunity to think. But we also know that some of these legislators got these jobs sometimes the easy way, simply because they speak the right language, and simply because phone calls have been made. But whatever the case, let the Legislative Assembly be a good role model. But finally, while you guys are legislating, you should remember that I've been talking about potholes until it went to the Twitter handles. That we've been talking about the traffic jams, the trains that UPC built and extended, the buses that UPC set up, they don't exist. So meaning the average Ugandan worker in Kampala wakes up at 4. Talk about the product. Wakes up at 4. So they spend 3 hours trying to navigate into Kampala. And if they're unfortunate enough to be 4 in the morning, to be around Kampala town, again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4:30, they're going to spend another 3 hours. So meaning the average Ugandan worker at Kampala spends 6 hours lost in traffic. So put all these things in context. Check productivity, check these people's lives, check these people's health, check the health and well-being of their own children, and check the amount of what they call man-hour in economics lost in productivity in traffic. It is colossal. Meaning that if you organize the leadership, which leadership, as I said, Marcy, is Museveni's leadership. It starts from the top. There was ever leadership in this country, but I will not go back to the disclaimer being raised by Harrison. No, it is clearly the responsibility that Museveni raise all these other things, but we're not going to go there. Let Mr. Museveni provide the leadership and create an enabling environment in which workers of this country, the socialist workers of this country, are able to remobilize and offer their services in exchange for fair wages back. For UPC, we said that we are no longer going to talk about minimum wage, Harrison. Can you imagine? Me, I'm offering that in the event that I'm UPC president, I'm going to offer what they call a living wage rather than minimum wage. Living meaning that amount of money that you're able to be able to live on per month. And so as we provide that, as I said, let's say so long, but people in Parliament, please, continue trying to represent us, man, and strike a balance between Mr. Museveni's executive, the judiciary, you guys, the fourth estate, and yes, your job for which we pick you guys as the legislators.
Yeah. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Kampira Harris, it's been good listening to you. We pray that you continue coming around and continue with the spirit of activism. And to Mr. Joseph Osheno, really appreciate your presence. They say always what an elder can see while seated, a young one cannot see while standing. Your views continue to provide a transcendent view of things, many of which you struggle with.
But I'm still young relative to others.
Maybe you're not standing, maybe you're bending. But we really appreciate your presence.
Thank you.
Really enriching. And to our dear viewers, thank you very much for joining us on this Focus on Parliament discussion. It has been a very rich discussion because it affects all of us, and we all know someone that is affected. And so we need to come together with whatever has been said here to try and put it into action. And we hope for a better Uganda overall. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure hosting you and having you today. Have a good day.